you go ahead and tell us about your topic, and then we'll send you questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, hello all. It's still dark here in British Columbia, and I came to this area of the world to study killer whales, Orca, because I was so curious about how an animal living in the ocean could have such a big brain, because whales hold their breath all the time, and brains require a lot of oxygen, and so I thought, well, they must really need this large brain for something. And I started working with 2 whales in captivity in Los Angeles, but every time the female gave birth, the baby died because she didn't know how to take care of it. And I realized that studying communication in whales in a tank was probably like studying people in a prison. It just wasn't going to be normal behavior. And these 2 whales were caught when they were only about 5 years old, which is very similar to a human. When you were 5, you didn't have all your language or, all your behaviors figured out yet. And so I contacted some researchers in Canada and was actually able to find family of the whales that were in the tank, particularly of the female whale. And the reason this was important is because every family of whales speaks a different dialect. They use different sounds. And so it was following those whales that led me into a beautiful little community called Echo Bay in 1984, quite a while ago. And everybody lived in float houses. And I hadn't ever seen anything like that and thought it was quite amazing. And my husband and I lived on a boat at the time with our little baby, and we just moved in. We just took the boat over there and tied up to the docks, and that began what I was hoping was going to be a lifetime of studying what whales are saying. And for the first few years, it certainly was amazing. Every time I saw the whales, I learned something new. Nobody had ever followed them in the winter, so we didn't know what they did. And it turns out that the area where I was living and studying them was the home territory of a 5-pod, which was also known as Eve's pod. The lead female was Eve. And these were Orca, killer whales, which are the biggest dolphin. And I also did a lot of study on the whales that eat just mammals, because there's 2 kinds of whales in 2 kinds of orca in Canada, or there's 3 really, but one group eats just fish, and one group just eats mammals, which is astonishing that 2 groups would be so similar. They'd be the same species, but they have such different behavior. And I got better and better at finding them and figuring out, where they travel, and the fact that they like to come into the archipelago against the tide. So it's like wolves hunting up breeze, upwind of their prey, because they could taste it or smell it. And I learned that they came with the salmon, and they came for the herring, and they came for specific runs. They were very precise in what they did. And it was very clear that the most important thing to these whales is their family. Because if you think about it, a whale always has to come to the surface to breathe. And if it's a beautiful, calm day, that's nice. The whale just rolls along this flat surface. But she also has to come to breathe in a hurricane or when it's hailing or snowing or dark or lightning. And I realized that these whales can never build a nest. They can never crawl into a cave. They can never be just in a quiet, safe little place. They always have to go back to that surface to breathe. And so for the orca and most whales, the most important thing to them is their family. That is their home. That is where they feel safe. And I'd watch whales swim along the channels, and if a mother whale went around a corner and her baby was behind, she noticed immediately that she couldn't hear him anymore, and she'd turn around, come back around the corner, and call to the baby. I saw a situation where adult male orcas lost their mother, and so these whales were now in their 20s. They were fully adult, but they were so distressed by the loss of their mom that they circled an island for weeks where they had last seen her. They just seemed like they didn't know where to go. So all of these things contributed to my perception of how important family is to these whales. And that's why, the issue of bringing whales into captivity is, we learned some things about whales in captivity, but perhaps the greatest thing that we learned is that they don't belong there, and that they really need to be with their families. So all of that was really interesting. But when I was your age, I read every book that was written about people that go into the wilderness to study, lions, chimpanzees, gorillas, elephants. I was fascinated by people that chose this kind of life. And I noticed that their books were all the same. Sorry. The first part of the book was always about the fabulous experience of going into the wilderness and figuring out how to survive out there. What are the people like? How do you find the animals? Where do you live? All of these things. And in those stories were these amazing discoveries that people make. Because if you go and live where an animal lives, you learn a lot about it, versus just visiting them. But then, there was always the second part of the book, and that was a realization that things were falling apart in the environment of those animals. That something, whether it was logging or agriculture or some kind of human development, was encroaching on the animal that these people had gone to study. Sometimes it was wars with the gorillas, or sometimes it was pollution. And for me, this happened when the salmon farming industry moved in about 1989. And first we thought it was a really good idea, but over the years, I've now spent more and more of my time trying to talk to government, trying to talk to people, because the salmon farming industry is having such an enormous impact on the wild salmon, which is the food resource for the orca. So I see some questions coming in. Do whales in captivity exhibit the same behavior regardless? No. Whales in captivity are suffering from tremendous deprivation. Whales in the wild will swim over huge distances every day. They play with each other. They join in big gatherings. They play with kelp. They chase fish. They do a lot of things, and in captivity, they're lucky to even have another whale that speaks the same language as them, and they are not behaving normally. Another question is, where do they live? The orca that I study live everywhere in the world. The Arctic, the Antarctic, Indian Ocean, British Columbia, everywhere. Kyle asks, there have been many recent studies about noise pollution in oceans. How has this affected communication between whales, especially among family units? Good question. Well, I have a hydrophone on right now. I've been listening to the whales underwater in my homes for, the last 30 years. And what we invariably notice is that when the large boats, the freighters or the tugs, that come onto the hydrophone, the whales just give up talking. and they just go silent. And this, for an animal that's vocal so much, to be silenced by something in the ocean is probably something they did not evolve with, and is definitely disruptive of their social behavior. Now, in the case of where I work, the Broughton Archipelago, the salmon farming industry began to play acoustic harassment devices. So these were to force the seals to get away from their fish, which, in some ways was probably a good effort on their part, and it was better than shooting the seals. But whales couldn't take it. So these sounds were at 198 decibels. They were designed to actually hurt the ears of the seals. That's how they kept the seals away. And tragically, I watched one family after the next come in to the archipelago and never come back. And you don't know that first day that they're never coming back, and you don't know even 6 months later that they're not coming back. But 10 years later, you do know that. And so, yeah, noise pollution is a huge issue. And friends of mine are working very, very hard on that. They put these buoys out in the ocean and collect data. They are called the Ocean Initiative. And you should check them out if you're interested in that subject. Sure. So the Orca in particular there's nothing random about them. Their behavior is always very precise, and they engage in activities that are sometimes hard to explain. And as a young researcher, when I was just 19, I was watching the whales in captivity, and every morning, just before the sun went up, they would go up to a certain part of their tank and they would squirt some water right at the tank wall. And that spot on the tank wall was always where the sunlight first hit. And of course, during the year, that moved around the edges of the tank. The sun is rising in different places. And people didn't believe me. They thought, that can't be. And so if you're going to study anything in the wild, you really need to learn how to document everything. You need to learn how to photograph, video. Of course, these things have become much easier with our electronic cameras. And you need to be very, very good at keeping records, because you want to look back through your records and go, oh, this started here and this date, and then it developed here and it spread to these whales. And so it's very important to keep really, really accurate records. Another question has come in: why do orca whales have lopsided dorsal fins in captivity? Well, that's a good question. I mean, they occasionally have it in the wild, so it does happen, but it's extremely rare. Some people think it's just from going around in a circle. Other people think it's the stress of being in captivity, because it's enormously stressful. Hard to see that in a whale because you can see stress in a dog a lot easier. They got hackles, tails, you can see what their eyes are doing. The orca are just so smooth, and they don't have a lot of expressions, and so it's hard to see. But people that measure their blood, the chemicals in their blood and all that, can see that they're stressed. So it could be that the stress is causing a decay in the structure of the fin, because they're 6 feet tall. And so, yeah, most of them do fall. What are your thoughts on efforts Washington State is making to phase out Atlantic salmon farms? What is your opinion of farming Pacific salmon? Oh, thanks for that question, Whitney. I am on the edge of my seat, hoping that Washington State will vote to phase out salmon farms from the ocean, because this is having a disastrous impact, because the simple reason that farms don't let predators in. The predators are the cleanup crew. If anything is sick, they just take it away. But in the farms, they live. And the whole time that these sick fish live, they're shedding viruses, bacteria, sea lice, and it spreads to the wild fish that just didn't evolve to survive this. Now, farming Pacific salmon, sadly, is no better because that's what they did in Norway. In Norway, they're farming their local salmon, which is the Atlantic salmon. But what happens is, because these farms are feedlots, all the rules are broken. And so, yeah, the pathogens get in there and they multiply, multiply, multiply. They don't care if it's an exotic fish or a local fish. And the pathogens mutate, they become more virulent, they pour out over the wild fish and kill them off. So they belong in land. You have to seal them off. So yeah, up here in British Columbia, we're really cheering you guys on in Washington State, hoping that you will vote to pull the industry out. Aquaculture is not a bad thing, but you gotta build a wall. Just keep it in a tank, put it on land is the best idea. Somebody's asking, do Orca have any predators? Do they have any predators other than people and other orcas? Oh, no. No, the orca just don't. They are the top predator, and so, you know, the biggest risk to them is disease or being wounded, particularly the ones who kill, you know, whales and sea lions. They can be bitten and they can be hit, and so no, they don't have any predators, but they don't multiply and overpopulate because they do have a pretty tough life. They're a big animal. They're warm-blooded in a cold ocean with no fur. So they do have blubber, but they have to keep their body heat up. They have to keep swimming all the time, and so they need to eat a lot to keep going. So as you know, as I realized more and more that the habitat, the world that the orca that I'm working with was suffering, and the number of salmon are going down, my life changed. And you know, Jane Goodall was my role model, and I always felt very sad that she couldn't just live in the jungle with the chimpanzees and keep learning these amazing things. She had to go out on the road, and she traveled hundreds of days a year. She's on the road, you know, more than 3/4 of the year, talking to people. And so, if you hope to go and do a similar thing, and you hope to, you know, really learn about an animal, there's a couple of other things that would be great. I wished I had done, and one is just understand politics a little bit, like, you know, who's in control, because you're going to have to figure out how to talk to them. And it's not always who you think. I mean, it's not the president. It'll be somebody farther down the system, and you need to reach out to them, and you need to appear reasonable, and you need to bring them the data. But when they don't accept your data, then you have to decide how far are you going to go. And this is a difficult thing, because traditionally scientists are supposed to stay quiet. You know, you just all of your output is supposed to be in scientific journals and in your reports, and you're not supposed to go to the streets with signs or even knock relentlessly on the door of the politicians. And let me tell you, that's what you're going to have to do. So figure out politics a little bit, who's in control. You need to be a public speaker, because these animals can't speak for themselves, and you're going to have to do that. And I spend an enormous amount of time trying to figure out, how do I get it across that what the whales need, we need. Obviously, we need a clean ocean. We need wild fish. Oceans make the majority of the oxygen we breathe. And so you'll have to always think about how to teach people basically the birds and the bees of life. You know, we don't just go to the grocery store and all our food is there magically. No, no, no. It came from this whole world that we're in, and everything is connected. And so you'll need to know all of these things. And you should probably take a really short little how to make a video course. That's what I'm working on a lot right now. People don't really want to hear writing. They don't want to read. And you know, you flip through Facebook and there's those short videos and you learn a lot from them. And so, yeah, you have to become very, very diverse. And there's so many brilliant young people coming up through the ranks. They're so incredibly skilled at social media. You guys are so connected together. That just wasn't the case. You know, when I went out to study the Orca, I was writing letters. It's hard to even believe now. You write a letter to another scientist in Norway and ask them, you know, how do I study sea lice and salmon farms? And weeks go by. And that was normal. You finally get your response. But now it's so fast and you can reach out so incredibly that these are very, very important skills to have. And you can look at my Facebook page, Alexandra Morton, Instagram, Alex for Salmon, and you'll see that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to reach out to people and give them ideas about what they can do. To continue with the Orca, my interest was in communication. What is that large brain saying? We humans, we've been talking to ourselves for all of our evolution. We've never really been able to talk to another creature. And so what I did was I had a little tape recorder, and one channel, one microphone goes underwater, and the other microphone I hold and talk. And I would, you know, describe everything I saw, which whales were there, what they were doing, what was happening around them, you know, were there other animals present. And then back in the office, I give each of these things a code, each sound a code, each behavior, each whale, they already had their names, and then correlate the two. And very quickly you start to see that there's patterns. There's patterns when they were excited. There's patterns when they were feeding, lots of echolocation. And I noticed that when whales would come into a big inlet, they would split into groups and they'd swim along the sides of the inlet and they'd be calling back and forth. And whales have this incredible capacity. I mean, their hearing system is so much better than ours. Like the connection between our ear and our brain is a bicycle path, whereas what the killer whales have is like a 6-lane highway. A lot more information is flowing back and forth. And so they can be, in calling back and forth, they can actually light up what's in between them, which is incredible. It's like a big flashlight. They would be, you know, scanning the water. So the whales on the other side could actually see the schools of fish that were in between them. And there's one sound that was incredibly fascinating. I couldn't really understand what it meant. So they did it when they were turning around. They did it when they started a conversation or ended a conversation. And they did it a lot when whales were being born. And I thought, what is the same about all three of those things? And I realized it's when all the whales were focused on the same thing. They weren't diverse and playing, weren't chasing different schools. Whales come into an inlet and they're going to turn around. They're going to take a right-hand turn and go down this path over here. Everybody needs to know we're turning right here at this crossroads. And it goes like this. It goes, and that to me was the most fascinating sound among the orcas, because if you were in front of the whales, you could hear the but if you were behind the whales, all you heard was a and so it worked like a bird's wing. So you'll notice that birds that fly in big flocks often have stripes on their wings, and that's because as they're flying, when they turn, the other bird goes, oh, they turned, they can see suddenly the bar of white under the wing or something like that. And this acoustic noise is very, very similar. The other thing about the orca is, and you know, probably many animals, the elephants as well. You know, I've read a lot of these stories, but they seem to have a capacity to sometimes do things that are just mysterious, and you wonder, did that really happen? So one of those cases for me was it was a day in the fall, and I was following a pod of whales in this big body of water that was open to the open ocean. And I was very new to water then. I hadn't done a lot of boating. And while I was out there with the whales, a fog bank came in. And it was so frightening because it felt like I was in a glass of milk. I couldn't see anything. One moment I knew exactly where I was. It was a beautiful, calm, sunny evening. And the next minute, it was just like white. And so on my underwater microphone on the hydrophone, I could hear a big cruise ship was coming my way. And I had this terrifying sense that at any minute the fog was going to be split by the bow of this boat. And I could feel panic, like just creeping up my body. And I had no idea what to do. And I was so inexperienced. I didn't have a compass, didn't have a radio. And suddenly the whales popped up right beside me. And I felt this incredible reassurance. I felt safe with them. I don't really know why I felt safe with them, because they were actually heading out to sea, but I decided I was going to stick with them. And so for the next 25 minutes or so, the whales were surfacing so close to my boat, just a little open Zodiac. They were so close to me that I kept switching the engine into neutral because I was afraid I was going to hit them. And suddenly I could just kind of see something, and I went forward a little bit more, and poof, I was out of the fog, and there was the island. I knew exactly where I was. It was still sunny, and I went ahead a little bit, and I put down the hydrophones, and I waited for the whales to come out, and I was going to just keep collecting data. But the whales never did come out. They turned around, and they continued in the same direction that they were going before. And I was just left trying to figure this thing out. The whales, okay, turned around, they stuck beside me, and as soon as I was safe, they turned around again and went the other way. And I never really was able to resolve how that worked. But suddenly I believed all the stories of dolphins pushing sailors to shore. There's a lot of mystery around working with animals, and I think you have to remain open to whatever you experience. Even if it's like you can't describe it with science, or there's really no words for it, don't be afraid of it. Keep it in your mind. Go back to it all the time. Turn it around. Try to see what it is. But don't be afraid of it. And that's something you will run into in science, is you will discover new things you can't explain. And you really need to just make sure that you don't duck away from them because you can't. Another question: do orca whales ever attack people, or is it just a myth? The orca don't attack people, and I've tried to figure that out, because sometimes I've been with the transient orca, and they're in the middle of killing something bigger than my boat, and I don't really understand why they don't attack us. It could be that whales echolocate, and when they echolocate, they can see right through something. It doesn't, like when a whale looks at another whale, it doesn't stop at the skin. The sound will actually go through the whale, and they can probably see their organs and their skeleton. They can probably see if another whale is pregnant. But with my boat, or people in wetsuits, because wetsuits are bubbles basically captured in rubber, they can't echolocate. So it's potentially they just don't know what we are. But they also play with things in a very rough way, and they don't play with us that way. So I don't really know why they don't attack us, but I personally have never heard of an attack. probably bound to happen because whales are growing up around people now, and so the chances of interaction is much greater. I mean, we know that whales have killed people in captivity, but then those whales are basically insane. They don't have parents. They don't have their society around them. Their behavior is quite aberrant. Whitney asks, what are your thoughts on Georgia Strait Alliance and other efforts to petition for Whitney asks, what are your thoughts on Georgia Strait Alliance and other efforts to petition for emergency protection for the southern residents? Is the political environment favorable for progress right now? First of all, I think what the Georgia Strait Alliance and others are doing on their initiatives with the southern resident whales is extremely important. And, there's so few of the southern resident whales left that they're in a very dangerous situation. The political climate is better than it was, but what we're finding with both our provincial and our federal governments here is that for some reason they never do the right thing. And I don't really understand why that is, but it's very, very, dangerous. And we're in a dangerous time because of this, because large companies seem to actually be running our countries rather than the governments themselves. And so the answer to your question is yes, the political environment is favorable, but no, it's not going to be easy. And in my view, the biggest thing that those southern resident whales need, and the northern residents that I study, is for these salmon farms to be removed because of the enormous damage that's done to wild salmon. And you can't immediately grow back the forests. You can't, hope we reverse climate change. You can't do that instantly. But you could instantly take these farms out, and then the wild salmon going to sea are no longer bathed in pathogens that are killing them off. I think it would be very important, and I'm really hoping Washington State leads the way, because if you guys are able to get rid of the fish farms, Canada will follow you. It will be a huge benefit to the whales. Priscilla says, what is the outlook for orcas based on pollution in the oceans and predictions of climate change? Well, I guess the outlook for orca is probably better than a lot of animals because they move around and they're so intelligent. But I don't know what the outlook is. Definitely threatening their lives. They're threatening them with extinction. And predictions for climate change are frightening. So the best thing that we can do is just lean really hard to try to turn these things back. I mean, one of the greatest things apparently people can do to slow climate change down is to reduce the amount of meat that you eat. And look at some videos like Cowspiracy. This is something we can all do because of the enormous impact that particularly beef production has. As for pollution, the plastics, microplastics, people are on that, and that is changing. The move to solar energy, alternative energy, is enormous. I live off-grid. I've lived off-grid for decades. And it's now simply becoming cheaper. So there's a lot of good things happening. I don't want you guys to feel like, there's nothing good happening. You must be aware. But yeah, we've pushed things pretty far. And the orca are suffering from that. What is my favorite whale? Well, the orca. But amongst the orca, it was this little female named Sharky. And Sharky, for some reason, had a dorsal fin that looked just like a shark rather than the big curve. Hers was really sharky. And she's gone now, but she was so curious about us when we first started working with orca, because people that grew up on the coast of British Columbia were afraid of them. They'd been taught to be afraid, and people would throw rocks, fishermen would shoot at them. Even the government tried to lower their population. And then suddenly, people in small rubber boats started following them around. And the whales were pretty surprised by this. And the older matriarchs really didn't want anything to do with us, but their kids did. And I remember Sharky coming up, and I'd stick my hand in the water over the side of the boat, and she would echolocate on them. She'd be putting her head back and forth like this, and I could actually feel the pulses of her echolocation on my fingers, and she's very curious about fingers because she doesn't have them. And so yeah, but I don't follow the whales as much as I did, so I don't know the youngsters. But because yeah, I've spent the last 30 years really fighting fish farms to try to preserve their food. We've had some amazing other whale stories in this area. Like when I first came here, we had no humpback whale. And I remember the first day I saw one, I was actually camping that night. So we'd followed a bunch of Orca up Knight's Inlet, and we camped in a place called Minstrel Island. And these fishermen came in from an early fishing trip, and they were going, "Oh my gosh, there's a killer whale out there, and the dorsal fin is 10 feet tall." And one guy goes, "It's all black," and the other guy goes, "No, it was all white." And it's like, okay, guys, it can't be both. And 10 feet, well, that's pretty big for an orca's fin, and I thought they were just making it up, but they were so excited. I know they'd seen something. So my husband and I, we headed out, and there was a humpback whale, and it was lying on its back, and it was flopping its huge pectoral fin, which was 10 feet tall, and one side was black and one side was white. So they hadn't seen an orca, they'd seen a humpback. And that was the first one we saw, and we were stunned. And now there's so many humpbacks in this area, and they're bringing their youngs back, and they're starting to sing in the late fall, and they'd all been whaled out, and now they're making a comeback. And the other animal that came back while I've been here is the Pacific whitesided dolphin. We first heard them on Christmas Eve in 1985, and I had no idea what they were. They were on the hydrophone at night, and we had to convince our little boy on Christmas Day that we had to go out in the boat just for a minute before we opened the presents under the tree. And there they were. There were 7 Pacific whitesided dolphins. And I thought, oh, they must be lost because they're an open ocean dolphin. That's what we had thought. That's what the literature said. But then over the next 30 years, more and more and more of them came in until there's about 1,000 in the area at times. Started to bring in their young. They started to figure out the difference between the orca that killed them and the orca that don't kill them. And for the whales that don't kill dolphins, for the fish-eating resident whales, the dolphins just harass them mercilessly. They cluster around their heads, bow riding on them, they jump over them. The orca hates them because they're like flies or mosquitoes or something. But it does let you know that there's a lot of capacity in this ocean, and it's good to know that some things are making a comeback. And when we stop damaging them, killing them, or I don't know really why the dolphins left or why they came back, but something went right there. And so it's been amazing to. I mean, that's the great thing about doing long-term studies. If you do a long-term study, you start to see these trends, and you understand what is normal and what is new. And in the area where I work, a lot of us follow Orca because each whale has a unique dorsal fin and a unique saddle, gray patch right behind the dorsal fin. We actually, by communicating with each other, we know that individual whales have moved over these large areas, where they are, what they're doing, not so much in the winter, but you start to understand just how far they travel and what they need and where they go and what food resources they are tapped into. There is nobody doing the language work that I had to give up to do the environmental work, so if any of you are interested in that, I be an incredibly interesting thing to pick up. You'll need a lot of math skills for that because you will generate huge numbers with the amount of data there is in their calls and the amount of complexity of their behavior. But it would be great if somebody would pick that up and really figure out why they do so much sound production, whether it's dolphins or orca. Not so much the great whales like the humpback and the gray whales and minke whales. They're very different. You know, they have baleen. They're not hunting in packs or groups or pods. They're more loners. But the toothed whales, sperm whale, orca, dolphin, I think the potential for sound behavior work with them is really enormous. What else do you guys want to know about? You need to ask me more questions. Let's see. Right now, it's the spring here. You know, we're just heading into spring, and the herring are starting to come in. And with the herring come the spring salmon or Chinook salmon. The orca generally follow right behind them. So we're waiting to see an increase in the whales out here in the Johnson Strait area, the Blackfish Sound area. And what the first thing that we do when the whales show up after the winter is photo ID the whole group. Try to figure out who survived the winter, whether there were any new ones born. And yes, I do still listen to the hydrophones at night. It's going right now. All you can hear is the wind and the waves out there. Sometimes at night I'm woken up by the whales who are extremely loud, and that's always fabulous. Sometimes I'm woken up by raiders who are also extremely loud. I have to crawl out of bed and just turn that knob down because it just starts to shake the whole house. But listening year round, you really get, you can hear, you know, the dolphins going by, you can hear the otters swimming by. What hertz do the whales hear between? Well, they go very high into the kilohertz and quite low. So I started with Pacific white or bottlenose dolphins because those were the ones in the tank at Marineland Pacific that I had access to. But their sounds go above our hearing range over the 20 kilohertz, whereas the orca are right down into 8 to 12, and so their sound production fit my hearing range much better. So that's why I work with orca. Their vocabulary is very precise and complex. Their sound production doesn't change much over the decades. They're very, very careful with it. Whitney asked, why do humpbacks sing in the fall? I think they're getting ready to go to Hawaii and find a mate. And so they start practicing. And at first, everybody's kind of doing different noises. But then as the weeks go by, you can hear the song develop. And I know what they're going to say next. And so, yeah, I think they're practicing because they want to have a date to Hawaii or Mexico, where they migrate to. So they're tuning up, and it's very beautiful to hear. It's incredible. And there is the Orca Lab has I'm listening to their hydrophones. And so if you log into Orca Live, they're broadcasting. And quite often you can hear the humpback there here in British Columbia. And Whitney says they have several recordings in the fall from the San Juan Islands. Oh, that's fabulous. Because when the whalers first started killing the humpback whales, they thought there was lots in British Columbia because everywhere as people went, there was humpback whales. And so these whaling stations set up along the coast of British Columbia, and very quickly there were no more. And so what we realized is that there were resident populations. The whales just lived in one area, and they migrated out, but they came back to the same area. And so while it looked like there was a lot of whales, those were all the whales. And the whaling here continued right up until about 1960, and then now it's quit. The whales are reestablishing themselves, and so we have visitors every year. We have the same ones every year, year after year after year, and some of them appear to actually spend their whole life on the coast. The ones that aren't going to Hawaii, that aren't hoping to, be part of mating, the young ones, I guess, or the older ones. But anyway, they can pop up at any time. And here in early February, with the herring moving in, I expect to see some. I'm looking out over Blackfish Sound right now. I expect to see some show up at any time. Yeah. Let's see. What else would you guys like? I guess one of the more interesting thing about the orca is their society. And like I said, there's the fish-eating groups of orca, and they look differently than the mammal-eating groups, which we call now the bigs whales. We used to call them transients, now it's called the bigs whale after Mike Big. And he was the guy who figured out you could tell whales apart. And interestingly, there was a lot of whale captures going on in Washington State and in British Columbia until we could tell the whales apart. And as soon as we could tell individual whales and who belonged to what family, the people that were capturing the whales couldn't do it anymore because people were like, no, that whale belongs, that's her mother, and that's her grandmother, and that's her brother, and we can't take this whale out because she is needed by her family. And it was incredibly powerful. As soon as we could tell the whales apart, and we became aware of their life histories, people couldn't catch them anymore. It was very, very, very effective. That wasn't the intent of figuring out who's who in the whale world, but it really worked well. And so you have the fish-eating societies of whales. They're very vocal. The families are bigger. They have really strict patterns that they travel on. They just really want to go where the salmon are. And then there's the mammal eaters, the bigs whales, and they keep their families smaller. Members of the family do emigrate out and form their own groups. Probably because when you kill a seal, it can feed fewer whales than when you run into a huge school of salmon, which can feed a much larger family of whales. And these two different societies, they don't really like each other. If they encounter each other, they will, spread to either side of the channel, come sneak by each other. There have been a couple of what look like, aggressive behaviors towards each other, and they don't interbreed, and that's why they look a little bit different. So with an orca, if a group of whales speaks a different language, you don't go mingle with them. Stay with the whales that speak your mom's language. What are some tips for working with kids and families from your experience? You mean being in the field with your kids along with you? Yeah, a lot of people ask me that question because my children came out with me all the time because there were no babysitters out there in Echo Bay. It was such a small community. And so if you want to work as a family out there, number one, your kids have to be happy. You have to have toys. You have to have audio tapes for them or, videos for them. You have to have books. You have to stop, get out of your boat, go to the beach. you really have to make sure your children are happy, and so you need to figure that out for your own situation. I was always lucky because I was working in my own boats. I wasn't working with a big team, and so I could you know tailor my schedule to and my boat to what they needed. And as soon as they got old enough to not be in the boat, that's what they chose. They would radio a friend, and I could drop them off on the way and then pick them up on the way back. But for the most part, we did really well. When they got older, um, I would tie up wherever they were interested in spending the night, like during the summers when we lived in my boat. And they all had friends in different areas, different islands, and so I would tie up there, and they would play with their friends or hang out until late and then sleep late on the boat. And so that worked very well for us as well. Aside from salmon farms, what's the biggest threat to the Fraser River salmon? Well, one of the greatest threats is the fact that this Mount Poly mine, their tailing ponds broke and poured all of this chemical into Quesnel Lake, and this is distributing itself down the Fraser River. People are trying to sue the company right now to stop this and to send a message to other mining companies that this is not good. Incredibly, the government has allowed them to get away with this and to even continue dumping the chemicals into the river. Just mind-boggling how we could allow that, because the Fraser River is a huge river, and it is the biggest wild salmon river in the world. And what's so incredible about it is it goes right through the biggest city in British Columbia. It goes right through Vancouver. And so, incredibly, we know that salmon can live with us if we just learn how to work with them. And so that's one of the greatest threats to the Fraser River. And then the other simply is the warming of water, climate change. We need to do everything we can to reverse that. Yeah, those are definitely greatest threats. But there's amazing science now that can actually read the immune system of wild salmon. It's called genomic profiling. And by doing this, we can actually, it's like the fish can talk to us. Instead of waiting until a fish is really sick, which basically doesn't exist in the wild because the predators remove it, genomic profiling allows the fish to say to us, the water's too warm for me, or I'm not getting enough food, or I've got a virus problem, or I'm doing great, I'm fat, eating really great. And so if we were to test fish, say, every 50 miles or 200 kilometers, all the way down the Fraser River and then up along our coast, you could see where the fish were having problems with us. And, let's say it's chemical pollution. Well, then we have to, become detectives and figure out, okay, where's that chemical pollution coming from? And then we can turn it off ourselves or clean it or reroute it or do something. And then the next year, we can ask the fish, did we make it better for you? And this is incredibly powerful, because previously when people would try to restore salmon, you would do something and the fish would either come back or not come back, and you could imagine that what you did had helped, but you don't really know. I mean, maybe it was something 500 miles or 1,000 miles away that made things better for these fish. But with this science, now the lead scientist on this is Dr. Christy Miller at the Pacific Biological Station in Nanaimo. And one of the things I really hope government will do is allow us to access this lab, allow us to send samples to her and her grad students, and figure out why some rivers in British Columbia are doing fabulous and some are doing terrible. We don't need to know. We don't need to guess anymore. We can figure this out by using this genomic profiling. And, if we use everything scientists know about our world, and about the animals in the world, we can change our behavior because, it's not against the law to protect life on Earth, fortunately. Because, it's not against the law to protect life on Earth, fortunately, at the moment. And, for those of us that live in democracies, we do have the ability to vote people in and out. And really, really important to take advantage of that, to interact with your government, because ultimately, everything we do that protects life on Earth is good for everybody's children. It's good for the companies, CEOs of the companies, good for their children. It's good for the environmentalists' children. It's good for the lawyers' children. It's good for everybody. And so, because all of you are so phenomenally linked up, you have power that we did not have. And so I see, my role and my generation's role to slow this runaway train down. And then the younger generations, you guys coming up through the ranks, and the guys that are slightly older than you are figuring out these solutions. Like there's this, incredible young man who figured out how to get plastics out of the ocean. Forgotten his name at the moment, but you should look him up. It's this machine, and then it's got these enormous floating wings that kind of guide the plastic in, and then it pumples it up and makes it small, and then these things can be offloaded and picked up. And the enormous advances in alternative energy. Sadly, Trump is taxing the development of solar power, but I don't think that's going to work because it's simply becoming cheaper than coal or gas. And so technology and science are very, very powerful tools. And that's why, people who want to damage our planet will end up trying to silence the scientists. But you can't let that happen. You just have to figure a way to be sure, because we're like the fingertips of society. And we send the messages back to the brain, and the brain really does not always want to listen to us, because we're saying, you can't do this. You need to do it this way. You need to change. But we are the fingertips, and we need to keep that information flowing back. So I understand I only have 2 minutes, and you can contact me on Facebook. Send me more messages. I applaud all of you who are interested in science around the world. And I think we have tremendous capacity for a really exciting future. It's going to take some tough work, that's for sure. But those of us who love whales, who love anything out there in the natural world, really, we're all connected. And I would love to help any of you if I can. And send me your observations or what you have learned, because, obviously don't know everything, and I'm always learning. Okay, well, thanks for all your thanks, love you guys too. And, yeah, take care. Have a great day.